Welcome, friends, to Beyond the Crucible, a podcast that dares to talk about setback and failure, but not so we can commiserate and so we can elevate. I'm Gary Schneeberger, the co-host of the show, and our mission today is to offer you the hope that your crucible experiences, those setbacks and failures and challenges that you faced or are facing right now, don't define you. They refine you. They did not happen to you. They happened for you. And nobody I know, that's true. Nobody I know knows that better than the founder of Beyond the Crucible, the host of this show, and my friend, Warwick Fairfax. Warwick, we are back in the saddle again, doing something besides our summer series, which was really a whole lot of fun. And these episodes are a whole lot of fun too. So we've got another exciting episode of just you and I talking, but it's about a different topic. And I know you're excited about it.
Absolutely. Definitely very excited to talk about this topic. One of my favorite topics.
That's a mystery, isn't it, folks? What is the topic, right? Let's let that settle in a little bit for you. No, okay, we'll go. This is another episode that we do once a month when we're not doing series. We haven't done one since June, but now we're back, and it's stories from the book Crucible Leadership, and we call this a series within the show because we like to do one about once a month. This is the seventh one that we've done. And this week we are going to look at Abraham Lincoln as just an incredible team builder. And you'll find out what led him to be such a great team builder as the conversation goes on. But let me set the stage for what we're doing here, because it's been a while, folks, since you've had a chance to hear one of these. Stories from the book Crucible Leadership. That's this right here, Warwick's book. If you're watching us on YouTube, there it is. It's a Wall Street Journal bestseller. It was released in 2022. And it's an important book because it was the book that birthed the brand. Without Crucible Leadership, there would not be a Beyond the Crucible. And what we do each month, because Warwick in the book talks about some great leaders throughout history, historical leaders in his own family, U.S. leaders in other countries, lessons we can learn about overcoming crucibles and leading lives of significance that come from these leaders. And Lincoln is, you probably happen to know two folks, if you've listened to a few episodes of the show, that Warwick really appreciates Lincoln as a both lover and student of history. So, Warwick, let's start where we always start in these episodes, where I ask you the rather short question, but important question: why Lincoln? Why did he strike you as someone who is such an important person to talk about when we're talking about developing leadership qualities, overcoming crucibles, and leading a life of significance?
So, Gary, certainly most people in the U.S. and around the world have heard of Abraham Lincoln. He's regarded as one of, if not the greatest U.S. president. He was the 16th president who was president from 1861 to 1865. During the American Civil War, one of the defining moments in American history. And C-SPAN, every, 5+ years or so, they do a survey of top U.S. presidential scholars of the greatest American presidents. And every time they do the survey, the result is pretty much the same. They rate Lincoln as the greatest U.S. president ahead of some, kind of stiff competition. George Washington, Franklin Roosevelt. I mean, these are great presidents. But yet they continually rate Abraham Lincoln as the greatest president. You might wonder, well, why? I mean, okay, I get it. The U.S. Civil War, that's a huge crisis. And Lincoln, through that effort, helped abolish slavery, and massive accomplishments. But, George Washington, after all, he helped found the country and got independence from the American colonies from Great Britain. Franklin Roosevelt, he helped bring the U.S. out of the Great Depression and helped, along with Churchill, win World War II for the Allies. So it's not like Washington and Roosevelt did nothing,
Right.
They accomplished great things, but yet Lincoln is always rated number one. And from my perspective, one of the reasons for that, at least I believe, is the key to Lincoln's greatness was the greatness of his character.
Sure.
His character is just awe-inspiring, as we'll unpack throughout this episode. One person who is very renowned, who commented on Abraham Lincoln, was Leo Tolstoy, the great 19th century Russian writer. He said, the greatness of Napoleon, Caesar, or Washington is only moonlight by the sun of Lincoln. He compared Lincoln to other great leaders in history and said Lincoln's supremacy was due to his peculiar moral power and the greatness of his character. So, I mean, Napoleon, Caesar, Washington, obviously Washington is somebody worthy of praise. Napoleon, he tried to conquer most of Europe and the Napoleonic Wars in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Caesar, back of Roman times, all great in the sense of accomplished great things, differing in character, certainly Napoleon. But it's sort of interesting that none other than Leo Tolstoy made the very wise comment that the greatness of Lincoln was because of his character. It allowed him to do everything he did and everything that he accomplished. It was the key to his greatness and his success.
Right. And as you were recounting Lincoln being number one in C-SPAN's presidential rankings, it occurred to me that, right, his greatness, even more so than the other presidents who have the same characteristics, his greatness wasn't so much what happened from the outside to him. It's what came from the inside out of him. That can be said of Washington, of Roosevelt, of all the presidents that you've mentioned. But there's something about Lincoln in the times that he was in, and we'll unpack more of that. It's the qualities that he had innately that he brought to bear on the job, not the circumstances that the job brought to bear on him, right?
Yeah, it's a very astute comment, Gary. It really, it was the greatness of his character. His character wasn't formed by the U.S. Civil War. Clearly, it was tested, but it didn't really turn him from some, man about town, hey, it's all about me, and suddenly, hey, I've got to man up, I've got to step up my game and be better because my country needs me. He always had high character. It was tested, but he didn't really find himself in the U.S. Civil War. It was really, he was already the person he was. He grew in knowledge and wisdom, I'm sure, but the person he was largely there before the outbreak of the U.S. Civil War. So very astute comment.
The first question that I'm going to ask you specifically about that is, one of the things I know that's impressed you so much about Lincoln, in addition to his character, but an aspect of that is his humility and the way he led with humility. And this is a man who, despite all that he accomplished, which we've just talked about, did not think too highly or even think very highly of himself many times. How did that serve him in his political career? That humility, that not believing his own press clippings, as they say.
Yes, indeed. Lincoln really grew up in humble circumstances. He was born in 1809 in Kentucky before spending much of his life and career in Illinois. Illinois at the time was considered a remote, sort of backwoods place. Lincoln, certainly for a fair amount of time, lived in Springfield, Illinois, which was and is the capital of state capital of Illinois. And he didn't have this upward career of continual success. He was self-educated. He didn't go to college. He read widely. He became a lawyer and was part of the circuit rider court, if you will. We had a judge and some lawyers that would go from town to town to try cases because there weren't enough lawyers and judges to go around to cover every town in Illinois. He failed many times before becoming president. He was defeated in a bid for the Illinois state legislature. He failed in business, twice lost campaigns for the U.S. Senate from Illinois. In fact, in one of those Senate races, he, a Republican, debated Stephen Douglas, a Democrat, in a series of epic debates that went on for hours, because back then, the only way you could hear about people is go see them, and somehow people could stomach a 2 or 3 hour debate and still hold their attention.
Right.
It's hard to fathom. And these were eloquent debates. These were amazing. I mean, the Lincoln-Douglas debates are famous. And that's great for posterity and history, but Lincoln lost. He was an eloquent debater, but still lost. So it's just amazing his humble circumstances. You think, in contrast him to George Washington, who came from a somewhat prominent Virginia family, certainly married somebody, prominent of great, considerable wealth, Martha Washington. You think of Franklin Roosevelt, that came from an almost aristocratic background of the New York Roosevelts. So, their stories, Washington and Franklin Roosevelt, as great as they were, they didn't come from the level of humble beginnings that Abraham Lincoln did. So really, Lincoln was a remarkable person despite his humble upbringing. He was far more intelligent and wise than on first appearance, when he would seem like the sort of backwoods country lawyer. And he was also a man of very firm beliefs.
I know you've been struck by how his authenticity and self-awareness enabled him to bring together this group of diverse men for his cabinet and ultimately win their respect and admiration, and the respect and admiration of the nation. And those are not necessarily the same thing, folks, as we talk about it. Winning the respect and admiration of the nation is one thing. Winning the respect and admiration of former political rivals is another. But keep listening, because you'll see exactly how that worked for Lincoln. So what did that whole journey of the team of rivals, putting people on his cabinet who weren't necessarily, they were fellow travelers, but they weren't necessarily initially friendly fellow travelers, perhaps. How did that all play out? How did that look in Lincoln's career?
Abraham Lincoln, he had this deep sense of humility, but it was anchored by profound self-confidence and inner security. He knew who he was. He came from a humble upbringing in Kentucky, lived in Illinois for many years. He was who he was. He didn't try to change his accent, try to seem like some fancy East Coast person. He didn't, remake himself. I'm kind of reminded of that summer series of Singing in the Rain, and Gene Kelly playing Don Lockwood. And listeners, go back and kind of have a listen or a watch of this. There's an early part of that movie in which Don Lockwood is saying, I grew up in a refined upbringing, dignity, always dignity. And, the montage in the back shows he grew up in poor upbringings. He was a hoofer in vaudeville. He remade himself. And that's somewhat common, whether it's Hollywood or in politics. There was no sense of a makeover or let's remake Lincoln into this posh East Coast person. He was who he was, this backwoods guy from Kentucky and then Illinois. And it just didn't worry him. It just didn't faze him. He didn't feel insecure. It is who, I am who I am. So he didn't boast. He knew who he was, and he had a sense of his own abilities, which was considerable. And I would say he may be one of the most self-secure leaders in history. I can't think of too many leaders who were as secure within themselves. He didn't need to prove himself. He had this amazing authenticity. He would tell these hokey stories to his cabinet about growing up in Kentucky and, I don't know, cutting logs and, I don't know, all sorts of hunting and all sorts of stories that would not be too familiar with the refined East Coast people that grew up very differently. And these stories were often long. And you can imagine the cabinet members going, oh, here we go, Abraham Lincoln, Mr. President's going on one of his stories. And there would typically be a point. There would be almost like a parable. There would be a point in his stories. Now, he must have known and seen the rolling of the eyes. It didn't worry him. It's like, I'm going to tell my story because there's a point, and that's how I share wisdom. And so he did. It just didn't faze him. So in 1860, Lincoln ran for president to be the Republican nominee. That year, the Republican convention was held in Chicago, and he went on to beat other more well-known rivals to become the Republican nominee for president. So just to give you an idea of how this went down and what people thought of this, one newspaper at the time said of the convention that the Republican Party had passed over statesmen and able men for a fourth-rate lecturer who cannot speak good grammar. Basically, the Republicans have chosen an idiot, an uneducated bumpkin from Illinois.
Right.
What were they thinking? There were other great people they could have chosen, but they chose, I don't know, the worst, least likely to succeed. What were they thinking? And his cabinet ended up being formed of his rivals, and they would agree with that newspaper assertion. So just to give you an idea of some of these folks, you had William Seward, who was a former governor of New York and U.S. senator. He became Secretary of State. As we'll see, he arguably was Lincoln's chief rival for the Republican nomination. Then you've got Salmon Chase, the former senator and governor of Ohio, and he became Secretary of the Treasury. We have Edward Bates of Missouri. He was another rival for the nomination. He became Attorney General. Each of these men felt that the wrong man had become nominee for the president of the Republican Party. So imagine assembling people who felt like you got the job that they deserved and that you're this uneducated country bumpkin from Illinois, and they're going to be in your cabinet. I mean, those first meetings aren't going to be easy. Here we go. I mean, the country is on the brink of war. Kind of hard to say no to being part of a cabinet, given how dire the situation looked when Lincoln became president in March of 1861. But, it's just amazing, those early meetings. I can't imagine there was much respect. And really, for more on the details of Lincoln's team of rivals, there's a great book that's been written by Doris Kearns Goodwin, one of the foremost U.S. historians. The book is called Team of Rivals, and it captures in great detail just these people who were in Lincoln's cabinet and the change in their perspective, and really how Lincoln grew as a leader, but just his security. One of the amazing things about Abraham Lincoln is that he didn't hold a grudge. He would ignore slights. Now, when you think about people in politics or business, if somebody slighted them, offended them, they typically never forget. Say, one day there'll be payback. There are a few big men or big women in the sense of being able to ignore slights and say, hey, I'm not going to take it personally. So one of the members of his cabinet was a man by the name of Edwin Stanton, and he would go on to be Lincoln's Secretary of War. Now, years earlier, Stanton had been hired as a lawyer on a case that was originally scheduled to be tried in Chicago. So Lincoln, being from Illinois, was asked to be part of the legal team. Now, it turns out that the case was moved to Cincinnati, but no one told Lincoln that his services were no longer required. Okay, so it's not going to be Illinois, it's going to be in Ohio and Cincinnati. But Lincoln didn't know that, so he turns up in Cincinnati, And Stanton completely ignored him, wouldn't invite him to dinner, even though they were staying at the same hotel. It's like, okay, he's not part of the team, don't need him. And it was completely ignored. Now,
And
Lincoln,
it's not like in those times that you could hop a plane from Illinois to. I mean, Lincoln had to spend some days getting to Cincinnati, so he had to put a lot into that. So the slight was even worse.
No question. Good point. And Lincoln wasn't a man to hold a grudge, and he knew that he needed somebody like Stanton with his drive, energy, and passion as the Secretary of War, and they were to be a great team. Stanton was energetic and passionate. Lincoln was thoughtful, cautious in some sense, but together they formed a great team that helped the North, helped the Union win the Civil War. Really quite remarkable. So, and when you look at the period after Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, it's amazing the change in attitude of his team of rivals who previously thought he was this uneducated country bumpkin, the wrong man who'd won the Republican nomination. You have, as I'd mentioned, Seward, who was Lincoln's Secretary of State, arguably his main rival for the nomination. He wept when he heard about Lincoln's assassination. He was just beyond consolable. He said Lincoln was the best and wisest man he'd ever known. The best and wisest man, this country bumpkin from Illinois. Remarkable change. You had Attorney General Bates said Lincoln comes very near being the perfect man. And then Union General Ulysses S. Grant said of Lincoln, he was incontestably the greatest man I ever knew. This is Ulysses S. Grant that, after a few generals that didn't do as well, became the only general that seemed that he could go toe-to-toe with Robert E. Lee of the Confederate Army and beat him. I mean, this is Ulysses S. Grant, one of the heroes of the U.S. Civil War. For him to say that Lincoln was incontestably the greatest man he ever knew, it's just astounding. So really the key to Lincoln was he had this sense of self-confidence, this inner security that meant that he could listen to diverse perspectives without feeling threatened. There was one occasion, and Doris Kearns Goodwin writes about this in her book, in which somebody came up to Lincoln and said, one of your cabinet members said that you're an idiot. So rather than getting offended, Lincoln said, well, basically, thank you for that. I may well be an idiot, but help me understand where in particular that I'm an idiot. So rather than just saying, oh, you're all wrong, what are you thinking? It's like, okay, there might be areas in my life and my presidency where I'm an idiot. Help me understand where it is. It's just he wasn't offended because he wanted to grow and learn. How many leaders, when you call them an idiot, will go, what do you mean, an idiot? I'm not an idiot. They'll get all defensive rather than, you think I'm an idiot? I'd love to understand where, because I'd want to grow and improve. That's basically the subtext of what he's thinking. It's truly remarkable, Lincoln's character and his willingness to do the right thing no matter what. There's one other instance that Doris Kearns Goodwin puts in a book that I really find remarkable. Salmon Chase, as I've mentioned, was Lincoln's Secretary of the Treasury. Of all the members of his cabinet, he gave him undoubtedly the hardest time. He was really a pain in the neck in a lot of ways. In 1864, Chase had some of his supporters basically write very critical things of Abraham Lincoln. So, because Chase was hoping to win the Republican nomination for president in 1864. Here we are still in the middle of the U.S. Civil War. You'd think somebody would be a bit loyal and say, look, I might be ambitious, but it's not the time to change horses in the middle of a war. But, Salmon Chase was like, well, in some ways, me first. I think I'm the better man. I've always been the better man. And I'm going to basically use some skullduggery and put the word out that, say bad things about Lincoln. And so, Lincoln was a smart guy. He knew exactly what was happening. He was not naive. He may be secure, but he's not naive. He knew what was happening. And eventually after, threatening to resign on countless occasions after the 83rd time, however many it was, eventually Lincoln accepted it. Despite all this, in December 1864, there is a vacancy for Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So who does Lincoln nominate? He nominates Salmon Chase, the guy that tried to, through back channel skullduggery, get rid of him before as the nominee of the Republican Party before the 1864 election. He nominates him to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, like the highest honor in the law. And he said, Lincoln said he believes that there is not one man in the Union who would make as good a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court as Chase. It's just astounding. One of the things that one of Lincoln's personal secretaries said, sort of executive assistant, if you will, John Nicolai, said of Lincoln, probably no other man than Lincoln would have had the degree of magnanimity to thus forgive and exalt a rival who had so deeply and so unjustifiably intrigued against him. When you talk about character, that is Olympic level of character. To forgive Chase for what he did, we're not talking about 30 years early, we're talking about the 1864 election, and then in December 1864, nominating him as Supreme Court Justice. I mean, what is that, weeks, months after all this intrigue? We're talking years. I'm dumbfounded by that level of character and forgiveness and doing what he felt was the right thing for the country. It's not about him. So it's really awe-inspiring, his character.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about Salmon Chase. I don't think Lincoln would have cared that Lincoln's on the $5 bill in U.S. currency. Salmon Chase was on the $10,000 bill in U.S. currency, the largest denomination ever circulated. They stopped making them in 1945, but I don't, so if you're related to Salmon Chase, you're probably like, yeah, he's on the $10,000 bill. I don't think Lincoln would have cared, right? He wouldn't have given a whit about the fact that Salmon Chase is former. In fact, he probably would have congratulated him if he
would have said, good for you, well done.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. You were Secretary of the Treasury. You deserve to be on the $10,000 bill. Yeah. This idea of building a team from the basis of humility, important one for us at Beyond the Crucible as we talk about bouncing back from setback and failure and moving toward leading the life of significance. How can we take some of the lessons that we've talked about here of Lincoln's life and apply them to all of us to help us lead a life of significance?
I think to achieve anything great or worthwhile, as we say here, you typically need a team of fellow travelers, people with diverse skills and perspectives that you may not have. But to be able to assemble such a team, you have to have a high degree of self-confidence and security. You've got to know who you are, be authentic, and not be threatened by others. You have to be willing to assemble a team who in some areas are better, quicker, faster, and smarter than you. You have to be not threatened by other people's gifts. You have to know that you don't have all the skills, knowledge, and experience to accomplish your goal and that you need help. Now, this is easy to say, but yet it's so rarely done. Most of us, you think of, families in the work world, sports teams, wherever you've been in life, where you've been with other people, how many times do you feel like the leader of the team is not threatened by people who are better than they are? It's almost unheard of because people are human and they don't like to be shown up by somebody that's better in so many ways than they are. But with Lincoln, it was like, we've got the U.S. Civil War to fight. We've got to abolish slavery. There are some important things going on here We can't be worrying about petty grievances. We need the best people possible, like Edwin Stanton as Secretary of War. He was a great Secretary of War, but most people would never have hired Edwin Stanton as Secretary of War after that slight in Cincinnati so many years ago and ignoring him and humiliating him.
Right.
That's not the kind of thing most people would forget. But for Lincoln, it's like, he's the right person for this job. And he was. Country first, the mission first. Very few people are like that. You have to have a high level of self-confidence, which doesn't mean arrogance. It's like, you know who you are, you know your abilities and your skills. You're not embarrassed by it. You're not apologetic about it. You know who you are. You've got this inner self-confidence. But that can also breed great humility because you know there's a lot of skills you don't have. And that's okay. You don't have to be the best at everything. So at Beyond the Crucible, we talk about really one of the most important things in life is leading a life of significance, which we define as a life on purpose dedicated to serving others. It's very hard to do that by yourself. You typically need a great team, a team of fellow travelers. But to assemble and retain a team of fellow travelers, especially ones that have great ability and great capacity to help you achieve your goal.
Right.
It requires a lot of inner soul work, a lot of work on our character saying, okay, there may be days in which I feel like a moron, an idiot compared to them. But that's okay. It's not about me. It's about the goal, and I'm not going to let that faze me. So that level of soul work and character is really critical for greatness in any field of life, whether you're president, leader of a country, leader of a business, starting a nonprofit in your neighborhood, whatever great endeavor you want to achieve, you really can't achieve that without a great team. And you're not going to assemble a great team without that soul work, especially in this day and age when people change jobs and they change positions regularly. People don't put up with stupidity, with arrogance, with, people that have big heads. It's like, okay, great, I'm leaving. They'll leave in a nanosecond. To assemble and retain a great team, you've got to have a sense of humility and respect for others' ability. You have that, then they might actually stay, because it's pretty rare to find a leader of a team that has that level of authenticity and humility. It's, I don't want to say unheard of, but very rare. But it's critical for success. And it's critical for achieving a life of significance.
This is a great segue into, I think I'm going to start a new segment of the show. Let's embarrass Warwick. Because you just said that there aren't a lot of leaders who do that. And I just want to, call out the fact that you are one of those people who built a team like that, who built a team. I mean, I can't tell you, I've never told you this before. Every time I sit down and I read a blog you've written, right? I'm like, and I'm editing it, I'm going, okay, he went to Oxford and Harvard Business School, and I'm from the University of Wisconsin Parkside, and I'm editing his stuff. Oh my gosh. So, but you modeled that work, and I'm not saying that, you do. I mean, I think it's so important to you because you have done the soul work. Your own Crucible helps you come to a place where you could do that thing, where you could surround yourself with people with different skills. So I think you're a great example of what you're talking about. And if that embarrasses you, I apologize.
Yeah, growing up in a very wealthy family business, I just early on had this notion, just because I grew up in this wealthy family doesn't make me any better than anybody else. Australians also very egalitarian, so that kind of helps. But yeah, I mean, I'm proud, I guess, that I went to Oxford, Harvard Business School. Doesn't mean that it makes me a better person than anybody else. It doesn't mean there aren't other people that have experiences and qualities that I don't have. So assembling people with different skills who, like, I don't like selling, others of my team, selling or promoting. Obviously, you're much better at it than me. You're a tremendous editor. I mean, you have a lot of qualities that I don't have, as does the rest of my team. But, to me, that's just smart. You want to assemble a team of people of qualities that you don't have, respect them, listen to them. Doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that's said, but everybody has a right to their opinions, and don't assume people are wrong. One of the other things I often say is if you have a group of people and everybody says X and you believe Y could be right, but there's probably a high degree of possibility that they're right and you're wrong if you've assembled a good team. I mean, you can still say, I disagree with all of you, I'm doing this. And if it's some moral issue or issue of great principle, okay, maybe. But assuming it's not one of those issues, and often it's not, listen to your team if they all say one thing and you happen to disagree. I mean, there's a pretty good chance they'll be right and you'll be wrong. I'm not perfect in this, I got to confess, but I really try and walk the talk. If everybody says something, I will listen carefully. Even if I disagree at first, I'll ponder, I'll cycle back. Maybe they're right.
Reflect.
I'm a reflective person. And that's just smart. So yeah, I mean, thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, I do try and live what I believe, which again is not easy, but yes, thank you.
You're welcome. And that is a nice segue to the wrap-up question that I have here, and that's this. What are the big takeaways from Abraham Lincoln's public life that we've discussed today that can help our listeners and viewers make their vision a reality? What are the big takeaways from what we've talked about here about Lincoln? Because there's a lot of them. What would you say are the most important things to take away?
You know, we often focus on the doing of a leader and the great deeds that they've achieved in accomplishing something. And we might think those deeds are really part of their life of significance, which in a sense it is. But we often ignore how those leaders came to be those people, those leaders of greatness, be they well-known leaders in history or people we may know in our neighborhood that we think of as just great people. And I think Abraham Lincoln shows that the true foundation of greatness, of significance, of a life well lived is character. His character was just awe-inspiring. You know, when I think of Lincoln, I don't think so much of what he achieved, and that was immense. You know, winning the U.S. Civil War, abolishing slavery, preserving the Union, those are not small achievements. Those are mammoth achievements. What I think of is the greatness of his character. And it's interesting as I've been pondering this, I've been thinking of my own ancestor, John Fairfax. I've been kind of reading a manuscript by somebody I know, an Australian, Stuart Johnson, who's in the process of writing an incredible book about John Fairfax. And I just finished the latest draft of the manuscript. And obviously, you know, I've read a lot about him. There's a previous book in 1941 written by J.F. Fairfax on his life. And he accomplished a lot coming from England with nothing and founding a great newspaper dynasty and media company. And he was part of pretty much every nonprofit that I can think of in Sydney. He was an elder at his church, you know, wonderful husband, wonderful father. But what I'm awed by, and obviously not as well known as Lincoln, was the greatness of his character, his humility, his faith, his respecting the employees that worked for him. When John Fairfax died, his employees said, "We've lost a kind employer, a valued friend." There were no worker rights laws back then. This is not even his cabinet. This is just the rank and file printers and journalists. It's just amazing. When he died, every newspaper you could think of, rival newspapers, said, "We've lost a great man, a man of immense character, one of the leading figures in journalism in the colony and the young country of Australia." So in the back of my mind, obviously, you know, Lincoln, it's hard to compare, but with my ancestor, John Fairfax, I'm not thinking about the Sydney Morning Herald and the great newspaper empire, media empire that he created. I'm thinking about his faith, and I'm thinking about the greatness of his character. I'm thinking, wow. I mean, it's an ancestor of mine. I'm just awe-inspired by the level of character that permeated every area of his life. It's just awe-inspiring to me. And so that's who I think of. And so obviously not all of us are going to be Abraham Lincoln. And yes, in Australia, some people have heard of John Fairfax, but not so much elsewhere. You don't have to be Abraham Lincoln to, in a sense, make your mark in life. You may not have books written about you. Maybe only your family and friends in your neighborhood have heard of you, perhaps. But, to me, greatness is defined by greatness of character, how you care and love those around you, how you put other people first, how you're willing to assemble a team around you who have qualities that complement yours, even if they've slighted you years before. It's about the cause. It's about what we're trying to achieve. That's really greatness in the true sense of the word. So to me, you want to be a great person, have great character.
I have been in the communications business long enough, folks, to know when the last word on the subject's been spoken, Warwick's just spoken it. And that will wrap up the 7th episode of our series within the show on stories from the book, Crucible Leadership. We'll turn the page next month to another story to help you turn the page and move beyond your crucible to a life of significance. We will see you then, but until then, we invite you to visit beyondthecrucible.com, explore some of the resources we have there if this conversation has piqued your interest, and particularly go there to find, we have a free self-assessment, the Trials to Triumph self-assessment that will help you plot where you are on the map as you're coming back from your crucible experience. That's just one of the resources we have, but totally free. Will help you understand exactly where you are on this process that we always talk about here on the show, from setback to significance. Again, we'll see you next week.